Someone once said, I can resist everything except temptation. Well, that doesn't help us much, does it? What does the Bible say about temptation? I'm Steve, and this is Looking Intently. I put out 3 short videos on the Bible each week, and right now I'm going through the book of James. If you want to catch up on any past ones, click the tag in the upper right, and to make sure you don't miss any new ones, click the subscribe button and then that bell icon in the lower right. I opened up with a quote about temptation. I looked around to find that, and I saw several of them, and it made me wonder, what's your favorite quote or saying about temptation? Put that in the comments below. I'd love to read that. Well, James in chapter 1, starting at verse 13, writes, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." Remember, we're still in the context of those opening verses where James talks about facing trials. He's talked about specifically temptations. And so he's following up on that. He's expanding on that discussion. And he says then, "Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God." Well, why would a Christian say that? Again, he's writing to Christians. Why would a Christian say, I'm being tempted by God? I can sort of see that in the sense of it's in one sense the negative side of believing God's in control. You know, think about it. If you don't believe in God, well, then if something negative happens, it just happened. But if you do believe in God, then you've got to say, God, why do you allow this to happen? God does not cause everything that happens, but he does allow them. And so we've got that question. And if it is causing me to be tempted, I might be saying, God, why are you tempting me? James says God doesn't tempt us. He goes on to say, "For God cannot be tempted with evil himself. He's holy, and he himself tempts no one." God does not. It wouldn't be holy of him to try to get someone to sin. God never does something to try and get someone to sin. Now, you go on though, he says, "But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire." It's the idea, you might even hear it there, of a fishing image. The situation itself is the lure, and our desire, or evil desire as the NIV says, lust as the New American Standard says, it sees that situation and it wants to respond in an ungodly way. That's what brings about there. That's what equals temptation. It's not the situation itself. It's our desire to respond in that ungodly way. Think about it. In one situation that might cause a lot of people temptation is getting cut off in traffic. They're tempted to get angry. But there's other people who would experience that exact same situation and they don't have that desire. And so it's not a temptation for them. So it needs to be the two of them together, the situation and our desire. Again, it is some idea of a negative, an evil desire or lust. And we might wonder, well, okay, he's writing to Christians. I'm a Christian. How do I have an evil desire? I'm a new creature, a new creation. I have a new nature. Well, that new nature means that we're able to say no, and God's working in us and through us to say no, but the evil desire is still present. It's always the potential there to look at something and say, I want to respond in that negative way. And so that's what he's talking about here. And then he goes on to say in verse 15, "Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin." So you take all this together, the situation plus my desire, that equals temptation. Well, temptation plus the wrong choice, that's when it's sin. It's not a sin to be tempted. It's a sin when I give in to that and I act in the ungodly way. I go against his principles. And so as he talks here in the end, he finishes up, he says, "And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death." That's talking about initially, the first time we sin, it brings forth a spiritual eternal death that separates me from God. But as he's writing to Christians, he's not just looking back. In light of the context, in light of all that, there's an element where he's saying that continual, unrepentant sin will also bring about eternal death. Not from too many sins. I hope I make that clear every time the subject comes up. But it comes from rejecting grace. As we saw in the last video, from abandoning faith. We're saved by grace through faith. Well, that faith is more than belief. It is me surrendering to God. It's me relying on God. But if I get to the point where I'm not surrendering to him, I'm not repentant, well, then I'm no longer accepting his grace. I'm rejecting it. Paul, we're in the book of James here. It says in verse 16, James, "Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. This verse is like a transition from the verses we're looking at today and the ones we're going to look at next time. And it's a key reminder that this deception is what's at the heart of the temptation. And we're being deceived into thinking that'd be a good idea to respond in an ungodly way. And of course, it's Satan who's trying to get us to be deceived. Well, ask ourselves as we apply this, do I blame God for temptation? Definitely there are situations, trials that come, God allows, maybe even causes at times to help us grow, that can cause temptation to anger or bitterness or impatience. But again, the temptation is that situation and my desire. And so the real thing I need to focus on is my desire. Do I realize the part it plays? And what am I doing when I recognize, okay, I have a desire to get angry when I get cut off in traffic. I have a desire to lust when I see that certain thing. I have a desire to be impatient or whatever it is. What am I doing to feed that desire or not feed it? And that's the real focus here for us, at least it should be. What can I do to help? Situations are going to happen. What can I do to not have the desire to act in an ungodly way? And one key to doing that and everything else about the Christian life is reading the good book like a good book.